Hey everyone, welcome back to Novelists Unwind. I'm Johnnie Alexander, I'm your host. I'm so excited to be here today with Laura Frantz, who is an award-winning author of historical inspirational novels that are mostly rooted in her own family history, or at least inspired. So Laura, I'm so thankful to have you here today. We want to talk about your newest release. I've got a copy, I can show it, A Bound Heart. Yay! Yay! And we also just want to hear about your writing journey and about your family history and how it has influenced your writing.
Thank you, Johnnie. It's always a pleasure talking books and history.
Yes. Well, tell us about the story behind A Bound Heart, because this one is actually very personal to you because of you're the direct descendant of a gentleman who had to leave Scotland.
Badly behaved George, I sometimes say. He was a gentleman and a man of faith. But George Hume is my sixth great-grandfather, and it wasn't till a few years ago, I have this big genealogical chart, and there's George, and then there's me. And when you just are into other things, you don't pay much attention to your roots. We're all descended from somewhere. We all have interesting stories. But when I was applying my DAR application, Daughters of the American Revolution, was going through, I had to really take hold of those roots and look at that chart and fact checked all that history of mine.
Oh, wow.
And so that is how I became reacquainted. I had known about George, but I didn't know there were books about him, and I had forgotten that he actually taught George Washington surveying when our first president was 19 and 20 years old. The history books actually credit him with doing that. And so I was thrilled, and I thought, well, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. I'll just take George off that chart and try to spin that into this Scottish coming to America tale, because like Magnus MacLeish in A Bound Heart, my George, because of his Jacobite politics, the king seized him and his fellow Scots, and most of them were drawn and quartered. Who knows why my George got off? I mean, he was a political prisoner. He kind of rotted in a British prison for a while, and then they gave him the transportation sentence, which was put him on a ship, probably in irons, send him to colonial America. A lot of felons had that happen at the time. So my George landed in Virginia, and I really see the hand of the Lord on him through history, because, like I said, he was a man of faith, but he landed in Virginia. He was basically no better than an indentured servant. Well, lo and behold, he actually was a cousin to someone in the one of the leading lights in the government of colonial Williamsburg. And so he went to Williamsburg, and he became the crown surveyor. He was appointed by the government, which I find remarkable, because this was a British colony. He had rebelled against the king, and yet he ended up being a colonial surveyor, a royal surveyor. And he ended up teaching George Washington surveying. They actually worked together. Now, he was at that time when he honored the young George Washington. Well, young George was 19 and 20, and it's so fascinating to see their signatures side by side on these surveys. And then my George I think he was 48, 50 years old at that time. He was no longer a young man. And then eventually his descendants left Virginia and went to Kentucky, where my family is today. So there's George in a nutshell. And about her.
That's such an interesting story, and it kind of reminds me, I mean, it's not the same, but it reminds me of Joseph being sold into slavery.
Oh, exactly. In fact, it's so interesting. That gives me a little thrill chill. Yeah. That's my favorite biblical character is Joseph.
Oh, is it? Yeah, because it's, the whole thing, like, God meant it for good, and like, now look here,
exactly. Look, I know it's just remarkable to me. When it's so fascinating, they say even present day for us, if you just would turn around and look at your own personal history, look at God's hand in your own life, even in the valleys and the hard things. Sadly, my George, though he did well in Virginia, and married there and, had a family eventually, he never he writes these very poignant letters that we still have
Wow.
today to his family in Scotland, but he never saw his mother, he never saw his brothers, he never saw Scotland again. So I tried to kind of incorporate that into this upheaval and this huge transition that most of our ancestors dealt with. But it's lost to time. We don't know all that angst, separation, heartache. It was kind of like divorce from their own roots, their own country, and then you make a new beginning. Fascinating.
Yeah, that really is. And you have had the privilege of going back to Scotland and studying there.
I did. I've gone several times, 2 on tour when Liz Curtis Higgs does her beautiful Scotland.
Wow.
That was amazing because I met fellow history lovers, lots of them with Scots heritage. Then I went, the last time was with my brother, who is a pastor and was in ministry in Spain. And he came up and we toured. We actually stayed at a castle and we toured the Hebrides and took the train all over Scotland. And that's when I began thinking of George Hume and all that he had left. I didn't want to leave Scotland, and I'm just a tourist. How would it be for him when he had lived there, fought there, watched people die there, left his family? So there you go.
Did you connect? Were you able to connect with any long lost relatives from there?
No, I was not, but my son, who's a career firefighter in Washington State, he and I are going to go to Scotland the summer of 2020, and we're going to go to Wedderburn Castle, which my George lost when he was transported to Virginia. We're going to, look at kind of to research and look at those roots a little more closely because I haven't had time in past trips. So, and it'll be wonderful to do it with my son.
Yes.
Who's a young, he's 22, almost 23. History, he loves those roots. They're rich. He appreciates that.
Oh, that just is fascinating. I'm like, it gives me goosebumps. It's so cool.
Never a dull moment with history, believe it or not.
No, there's not. Oh my gosh. So again, I want to show the cover because it's beautiful. It's A Bound Heart. It's Laura's latest book.
There's an interesting story around the cover if you want me to.
Yes, I'd love to hear it. Love to.
Oh, Ravel is so good with their cover art. And they actually, when they found that redheaded model that matches my heroine, Laura McDougall, in the book, the shawl she's wearing, the plaid, is actually her clan plaid or tartan. And
nice.
The Ravel ordered that from Scotland. And that is a real model with that gorgeous real hair and a real Scottish plaid representing her McDougall roots. And then the castle, of course, I said, can you put a castle on some cliffs? I was glad they didn't do that. They didn't put Virginia on the cover because this is essentially a Scottish story of coming to America, but we started in Scotland, thankfully. And I enjoyed so much writing that.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. And Lark, she's a beekeeper on the Laird's Manor before he ends up having to go. And I read, I think on your website somewhere, maybe press material, that your son has actually taken up beekeeping. He got involved in this history.
In Kentucky, it was quite an education. He's fascinated with bees, and I get so tickled when he gets his bee suit on and goes after the bees. And it was ongoing education for me. Bees are fascinating. I don't know that I got everything right about bees in the book. There's not a lot about bees in the book, but I tried to incorporate the things that I had learned. And it's kind of shrouded in mist. I think the Puritans brought bees over, but those bee roots are actually quite elusive. No one is really quite sure how they came.
Really?
Colony. Can you imagine being at sea, bees at sea for 2 months or more? We do know, and I think this is an interesting bit of history, is that Native Americans in Virginia and, the eastern seaboard said that they knew the white man was coming by the advance of the bees, because bees were not native. And so the Indians were alarmed when they saw that, because they were students of nature.
Mhm.
So when the colonists came over with the bees, they said the white man is advancing because the bees would come ahead of them.
Oh my goodness, what is wow.
Fascinating. Yeah, so bees
Wow.
are very much a part of our settlement in our American history.
I guess didn't realize they weren't just indigenous. That
I know. I always thought they were, and
yeah.
you eat your honey and you like kind of like drinking your milk. You don't think about the cow or.
Right. You don't.
But it's fascinating to actually discover, the origins and what's native and what's not.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That is fascinating, and it's just so cool that you've been able to tie that into the story too. So another thing I read, which you write by longhand.
I do, and I've branded a dinosaur for it. I'm afraid, I felt kind of weird about it for a long time, but I think because I've been writing stories since I was 7 years old, and I've never stopped writing. And although I took about a 3-year break, I think, when my boys were little, because it was writing. Anyway, I've always written longhand. I love writing letters too. I kept a journal. In fact, I just burned a wheelbarrow load, I am not kidding, of journals in a fire.
Oh my gosh.
Last fall, when we were remodeling our house and I needed to get rid of all that stuff. And so I loaded the wheelbarrow up and actually burned those journals. I kept the ones when I was like 8 and 9, because those are charming, but the rest were like, who wants to read that? So anyway, I have this kind of like this love affair with pen and paper. And I've heard that research now supports the fact that when you write, you're more creative when you write in longhand. And I do find that when you word process or whatever, you engage your editor mode, and it's very much a very different thing. So, but sometimes in a pinch, I'll just throw myself on the computer at its mercy and type out a scene. But I don't feel as involved as I do with the book if I don't do it by longhand.
That is so fascinating to me. I've tried doing NaNoWriMo, if you're familiar with that, National Novel Writing Month.
I've not done it, but yeah.
I've tried to do that a couple times. So for those who don't know, who are listening, it's like in the month of November, the goal is to write 50,000 unedited words. And I've done that. I mean, actually, that's kind of part of my writing journey, was getting involved in NaNoWriMo. The first couple books I've had, 2 of my books have been published, actually started as NaNoWriMo stories. So I've tried to do it in longhand and never, those are years I never finished. There was so much other stuff going on. And because it was slower, I just couldn't get that many words down that quickly.
Oh, no, yeah, right.
To do it. But there is something very, I don't know, just like this more of a discovery, I think, when you write. When I do write,
a wonderful word. It is a discovery. It's like opening a door to another world. And somehow your hand literally connects with that, and it sends it to your brain. And in a way that I don't engage with a keyboard. But the keyboard is beneficial sometimes in a pinch.
Well, it's faster. It is. It's faster.
Oh, much faster.
Yeah. Do you then, so once you're done, do you type everything into your
what works best for me is I usually write a chapter 2 or however many, and then I won't wait till the end, because when you have that longhand version on a legal pad or whatever, it just is almost unreadable because there's all these slashes and words out dancing everywhere. So if I wait to the end, I can't decipher my own handwriting.
Gotcha.
So I do it pretty much chapter by chapter, and it's like you flip a switch. It's an interesting, you do that intense longhand, and then you go be editor mode. And it works well because when you see it all on the screen, once you do the word processing, it just is a totally different story. It's hard to describe.
I really like that.
And another tip for any maybe aspiring writers or whatever is I've learned late in the game to read aloud your finished work.
Mm.
Usually at the galleys stage, maybe before that, because you catch so many mistakes and errors and just overused words. So I'm a big advocate of audio now. Listen to what you're, read it, like you have a audience of one. Be amazed.
Yeah, I've heard that. I haven't done that, but I've heard that that's really a good thing to do. So it's probably something I should do too. That's cool.
It's hard though. It's hard to listen to your voice for 400 pages, but
yeah, yeah.
it,
One time when we were driving, my daughter and I were driving to a conference, and I think I forget who was driving and who was reading, but we were reading something I had written, and it was helpful, to hear it.
And now with the success, boom in audio, our audio books, it is really interesting to hear it that way as opposed to just reading.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. I never thought I would be, but it does help.
That's so cool. I got one more thing I really want to talk to you. Well, actually, I've got two more things. I have a
yeah, we'll put up a warning, a long broadcast.
Okay. One thing I thought was really fascinating because I really enjoy the I think it's on Masterpiece, Poldark. I don't know if you've watched.
Yes, I've watched. I think is it 2 seasons now? I can't remember. I watched every.
There's 3 and a 4th one out there. So
okay.
I've watched.
More in the works.
Yeah. So it's so interesting. You talk about your ancestor being a Jacobite. Am I pronouncing that right? And of course they're talking. That's part of the theme of the show because it's the aristocracy and the working people and all of that and the tension there. Where was I going? Oh, and it's so interesting that the hero Poldark, he fought for the British side in the American Revolution, was injured, and he comes back home and finds everything's changed. And I thought it was so fascinating that you had the opportunity to study in Scotland, and you actually studied the British perspective of the American Revolutionary War.
Very different than ours.
I bet. And I wondered, is there like 1 or 2 things that you still just remember or that popped out to you, like, oh wow, that's not how we see things and how they.
I know. Well, it's so fascinating to think back because you grow up and you read your American history books and you think that that's the way it was. Well, the British, and they still regard us. I had a tour guide in Scotland not long ago turn to me and I said, how do you, since we won the war, the foremost ruling power in the world at that time, and I think arrogance and pride, we know that scripture says, pride goeth before fall. I think maybe Britain needed to be humbled, and George Washington was a very godly man. But the tour guide turned to me and said, well, we see you and we always have as Americans are just rebellious teenagers. You'll try anything and you're very patriotic. So I think, first of all, I think the British were blindsided. Here's these upstarts, these men and women, and there were a lot of women behind the American Revolution in the colonies that, it was just a total, Britain didn't understand Americans. They still don't understand Americans. A lot of Britain, they kept fighting wars on the continent. Britain was suffering for cash, and you don't hear that side of things. They were taxing us to death. It wasn't just an arbitrary thing. Britain, was pounding the colonies, but they were trying to pay their own debts, their own wartime expenses. So there's a whole different side to that we just, don't see. The Spanish were at play, the French. I mean, we don't get the whole picture, but they do think we're a bunch of political upstarts. And I don't know that that's changed in 270 years. That's okay. I like the patriotic, rebellious teenager if you're using it in a novel way, so to speak, to build a nation building.
That's cool. My husband went to university in Birmingham, so we were over there I was there for 4 months, and girls were really small. This was in the 1980s. It's been a long time ago, but we didn't have a car, so we walked everywhere, and I'd walk to the grocery store and all this, and pass people in the street, and they'd say hi, I say hello, And just again and again, they was, you're an American, and they just wanted to talk, you know, and it was just always so delightful because they were so delighted, you know.
Right. It's I think they tend to. We have maybe, well, I don't know about the current political climate, but
Yeah.
I think Americans, to them, they say we're very friendly. We, we drink coffee, not tea. We're very different, and yet most of us are
Yes.
have British roots, at least.
Yeah, my family is. So yeah.
I mean, a lot of us, American colonies were mostly British. I mean, there were people, I mean, like my husband's family, they were Moravians from the Alps, but that's a whole nother story. So I can't say we were all British, but a lot of us did have British roots, and I think we continue to be a source of maybe semi-amazement to them. You know, we took on the leading superpower and we won. How does that happen?
Yeah. It is amazing. It is amazing. Well, I want to tell everybody that by signing up for your newsletter on your website, which is laurafrantz.net, they can get your 10 beloved books.
Yeah.
Looking at your little image, which shows like 8 of the books that have inspired you, and one of them, I was just like, Follow the River. I read that book ages ago, but it's one of those books that sticks. I just think about it every once in a while. And for those who don't know, Follow the River is about a woman. It really happened. She was captured by Indians. She lived in Ohio. She gets captured, but she looks backwards the whole way, and eventually makes her way back home.
It's an amazing story, that wonderful frontier history. It was so, the fact that it was true. And James Tom, the author, he's the only author I've ever written a letter to before I was published.
Really?
I said to him, "You are my hero. You bring history to life." And he actually wrote back. I should frame that.
You should frame that.
And he called himself a dinosaur. This was probably 20 years ago, and he was still at kind of the zenith of his career. And he said, "I feel like now I'm becoming a dinosaur." I don't know how old he is now, and I don't know that he's published any more books like that. But Follow the River is my favorite James Alexander Tom book. And if you're a serious history lover and want a thick, meaty novel, he's your man. He's your author.
And it is, it's a book that has stuck. My mom read it and gave it to me to read, and it just was one of those books that it's just scenes from it you just do not forget. And especially like I'm from Ohio, so it was, it was meaningful that way too. But
you don't want it to end. A sequel could just keep going for me with that book.
Yeah. So anyway, I encourage everybody to do that. Sign up for Laura's newsletter. You can see 8 of the books on her little image on her website.
The 2 are missing.
2 are missing. See what those two are. Laura, this has been so fascinating. Just fabulous.
Well, you're the consummate hostess. I'm so honored. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks. I want to show your cover one more time. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. A Bound Heart. I'm sure if anyone who loves historical, you're going to want to read this. And then my very last question, which I ask everybody, is when you're all done, what do you do to unwind?
I love to walk, and I take long walks, love to hike, love to cook. I have a small apron collection, and I love to cook, love to bake. I'm currently, I've had a bit of a health setback this winter, and so I'm eating very clean now and learning how to use strange things like coconut flour and stuff like that. So, and I'm feeling much better, thankfully. But I love to be with my boys. I have 2 sons. They're 20, 22 now, and looking forward to maybe some daughter-in-laws in the future. None on the horizon, but just family. I love to read. Garden, big gardener.
Wow.
And do a lot of canning, things like that.
Oh my goodness. Wonderful, wonderful.
In a nutshell, barefoot, usually in the kitchen, in the garden, not too far from my books.
I love it. Well, this has been just wonderful. Thank you again so much.
It's a privilege and a pleasure. God bless you.
Oh, thank you. And God bless you too. And thanks everybody for watching, and be sure to, check out all the other videos that we have with other fabulous authors. See you next week. Bye-bye.